Hi, everyone. My name is I'm going to be co-hosting this session along with Giulia. And yeah, I can't believe this is our last episode of the season. It's gone by so fast already. And yeah. But today we're going to be talking about what makes a good conversation. And we're just going to be continuing kind of what we've been talking about and just with a whole new panel of experts and perspectives. So I'm really excited to dig in and it should be a great conversation. So let's do a quick round of introductions and then we'll get right into it. Romina, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me to take part in this. My name is Romina. Hi, everyone. I'm based in Cologne, Germany. I've been a UX designer for around 15 years, and I've been focusing on conversational design for around, I think, 6 or 7 years. I've been working in that space, have co-founded my own company this year, focusing on communications and AI consulting, of course, hoping to do as much conversation design as possible in that area, but just kind of broadening up that space. I'm very excited about this conversation and looking forward to chatting.
Thanks so much for being here. Olivera, do you want to go?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Olivera Bay, and I'm located out of Toronto, Canada. I'm originally from Europe, from France and Bosnia, and I'm fully bilingual, principal prompt engineer and senior conversation designer working on various projects and actively looking for my next project. Apologies. And I've been working in various conversational AI consultancies. And as well as I've worked at Cerence AI, which is an automotive AI company. And most recently, I completed a project with T-Tech Digital, which is a customer experience company. And so I've worked on all the different touch points, such as chatbots and voice bots, and worked with LLMs. And what my sweet spot is really strategy and how to utilize the insight in a way we should, rather than just plugging things in just because. I like doing things for the right reason. Really glad to be here today amongst all these amazing human beings, and can't wait to get into it. Thank you.
Awesome. Nick?
Hey everyone, my name is Nick. I am a conversation designer. I've been in the field for, about 7 years now, working on all kinds of different conversational products. I've had experience at Drift and JP Morgan Chase, Conversation Design Institute, and most recently I'm with CVS Aetna. I don't know, I got into the space just because I'm very excited about the human-computer interface and just naturally speaking to computers. I think there's so much potential there. And the industry is just so dynamic and continues to change. So it's nice to keep our ear to the ground and have conversations like this. So I'm looking forward to it.
Sweet. Marcie?
Yeah, hi. Thanks again for inviting me. Really excited to be here and to be, part of this great pantheon of experts. It's an honor and a privilege. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is where I do my work. This is my home office, and I am working currently for Citizens Bank, where I am the lead conversation designer. So, like a couple people have already said on this call, I think everybody has said this, at least 7 years. So, yeah, I'm a 7 to 8 year conversation designer at this point, with a background in content design and content strategy, and was recruited to do a chatbot, and discovered that I loved to do it. Had an aptitude for it, and just became utterly fascinated, learning the patterns, and developing the best practices, and just really leading in an innovation space when it came to talking to computers. Just like you said, Nick, and it is such an ever dynamic, ever changing space to be in, and it always just grounds right in the language, right in the interaction. And with that, it's a place to be, to grow, to develop, and to never be ever bored professionally. So very happy to be here, and looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so I guess we'll just get into it. I'm curious, what makes a good conversation from your perspective? Does anyone want to jump in first?
Yeah, I would love to jump in. So I'm thinking just culturally, there are different ideas of what makes a good conversation. I know there was like an example of somewhere in my learnings about conversation design that culturally a conversation in New York versus one in California is very different because one is accepting of bargain, another one is not, is seen as rude. So let's maybe unpack like the idea of bargain and why is it unacceptable in some cultures, why it's acceptable in others, and I just find what's really fascinating and just the zigzag of a conversation, how it can go on tangents, how it can summarize, how it can step back, how we can go deep, or keep things really light and just conversational.
Romina, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I love what you said, Olivera, in terms of like kind of it depends, right? Or it can be different parts that make conversation good. I think that is very important. And that's something I keep thinking about a lot. Also, whenever you get questions about conversation design, and often my answer to almost everything is like, it depends. And it's like, it depends on what the user's goal is and what setting you are in, what context you are in. So of course, there's like a lot of, I would say, classic stuff that makes like talking to one another or human and machine interaction like good or bad. But yeah, it really also depends on why it's important to just take into consideration what the user came here to solve in the first place. And then, yeah, what is acceptable, like should be longer answers, shorter answers, really depending on, yeah, like I said, what the user came here for and who the user is too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think one thing that's really cool about a lot of the systems that we build on is that they're dynamic and allow for something like bargain. So then it becomes in the user's hands, right? Like if they want to, even if they know what the bot's going to say, but they're just going to wait to have it finish its sentence, you have that option. Or if the customer or user is just comfortable with, hey, like I know where you're going, I have something, a follow-up, I just want to say it now, like you also have that capability. So I think there's something to the dynamics of these systems that, you know, you meet the customer where they are. If that's something they feel comfortable doing, then great. And if not, that's okay too. But I guess no bots are interrupting people yet. So that might be a whole nother question.
You know, just to expand a little bit on that, Olivera is an expert in localization, and I live in Minnesota, which is the land of Minnesota nice. So we are sort of locally uncomfortable with interrupting people. It happens, but then it's considered an interruption. Whereas that tendency, you know, that culturally built-in habit will actually bleed into how we interact with bots. But Nick, to your point, having that as an option is key because we do like everybody get impatient and do need to move on. So you know, it's having that having those options, and as you say, exactly as you say, you know, meeting people where they are, and then backing up to Romina's point, you know, taking a look at, you know, what is it that the people have come here to do? Like, what does the user come here to do? And so this is where I find it's really an interesting intersection point between, you know, what we think of as a deterministic conversation, right? So we know the path that we want the ideal experience to look like, right? And then, you know, where can we bring in things like LLMs, you know, that can do like this, you know, this automation version of a conversation. Like there are low risk and high risk scenarios for those, right? Obviously, we've all talked about this. We know about human in the loop, and that being at least I'd say perhaps a battle flag, if nothing else, for ensuring that risk is mitigated. You know, it's at least mentioned, it's at least understood for businesses, so that when humans actually have the interaction, they're having a safe experience with the bot that is talking to them in a way that won't upset or freak them out, and is also going to represent the company, the brand, in a credible way, especially. And so I've also worked in healthcare. I worked with United Healthcare. I currently work in financial services. Having the safety mechanisms built in so that things like PII are not accidentally accessed, that safety and having those guardrails built in is going to be pretty important. This is pretty elementary things that I'm mentioning, but at the same time, it remains important to keep front of mind as we move more and more forward into this innovation, this innovative area of using LLM. So where can we plug that in safely, such as intent classification, right? So that's a pretty safe back end area for LLMs to do definitely their best work, but it's not their only work by far.
That's super interesting. All of these comments really take us in a lot of different directions of what are conversations and what it is that makes it a good conversation. I'm wondering also if you can, if any of you have thoughts on what are things that make it a really bad conversation? What are things that separate a bad conversation from a good one? And maybe to also tie it into what it is that we're all trying to do. What are also things that we see companies struggle and that tend to bring us towards more those bad conversations rather than the good one when they get into the conversational AI field?
Mm-hmm. One immediate thing that comes to mind is the use of pause in a conversation when it's non machine interaction, is just human to human. A pause can be a signal of, well, something wrong, or it can be a intentionally done pause where it's actually very powerful because it allows for a moment before making your point and making it, maybe emphasizing your point. Whereas if I was interacting with a machine and there was a pause, I would quickly think that there's something wrong. So I have not yet explored a way to use that effectively. I'm not just saying that in all case scenarios it would be wrong with a interaction with a machine to have a pause, but I would say that would probably not be ever something I would use in my design work, because I, as a user, would think that there's something wrong and then maybe the bot died or something is wrong. So I just pause on that for a second.
I love that thought, and I'd love to immediately build upon that, because I like what you just said in terms of course, you compare the conversation human to human versus human to machine, right? And some mechanisms work in both, but many might not, right? Because typically when we talk to each other as humans, we have more than just our voice or more than just chat. There's also other cues and stuff, right? But what I think is, I just thought when I heard you speaking about the other question Giulia had in terms of what do companies tend to do wrong or stuff, I think one of the most easy things to get wrong is believing just because I can speak myself, I am perfectly able to also design a bot conversation, right? Because it's yes, I've learned to speak. I'm great at speaking. So of course I know perfectly well how to design such a conversation. And then you end up kind of testing it. And then comes what Olivera just said in terms of, oh, maybe that specific technique doesn't even work between a bot and a human. So yeah.
And these last two comments, what they have in common, and what a lot of things that make a conversation fail have in common, is that they fail to maintain trust. They fail to, really keep the trust unbroken between the brand and the user, and its customers. By doing all of these behind the scenes things that we expect, as conversation designers, that really make a conversation, fluid, seamless, anticipatory, and intuitive, and also providing enough and not too much information, being careful with hierarchies, but at the same time keeping things flexible and allowing the user to move between intents and, up and down a conversation just through constructing patterns and patterns of patterns that are easy easy to navigate with just using speech, right? And when those patterns break and when the user needs are not anticipated, when things like infinite loops are not broken, and all things that I see heads nodding in agreement, all things that we've confronted in our efforts, trust then gets broken, and that has ripple effects, out from our discipline. Like, I don't know how many times you guys have heard, I hate chatbots. I have heard this. It's been said to me, to my face, in a kind and caring way. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm here to make them better. But then also, it also does affect the company, and their brand trust with their users. So that's foundational. And this design thinking that we bring to it, the pattern recognition, the logic, the thinking things through, the good dialogue, including brand appropriate voice and tone that's also conversational and doesn't talk down to people and talks to them. These are all really, really important trust builders. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to build off your point, Marcie, because I think trust is like fundamental, and one key aspect of that, at least in my mind, is mutual understanding. So whether you're talking to another person or a bot, like, I think what we're looking for when we're having a conversation is that, like, you understand what I'm saying, what my intent is, and that I can understand your response. And I think a lot of times when we see bad bot experiences, especially, you lose that understanding. Like, you're not considering why the user is here or what they're actually looking for, and then that's when we have these like infinite loops, or someone who's just saying take me to a human 10 times in the chat. Like, I think that understanding gets lost. Or even to your point, Olivera, about like pauses in the chat, like if you're talking to someone and then they just pause, like, you're no longer understanding what's going on. So I think there's something to communicating, like, this is what I understand. Is that like what you're looking for? And then having that conversation to also build trust.
I love that. I want to like just chime into that to say the trust piece and being understood and clearly communicating what is understood by the bot, so that the human doesn't have to do the legwork, and so that it's really crystal clear where the bot stands in their understanding. Because oftentimes we're just assuming they're understanding us, and when in the course of that experience we find out, yes, it did understand, or it didn't understand, or maybe it's somewhere in the middle. And and I would hazard to guess most experiences are in not understood or somewhere in the middle. And like, more rare do we find that we're completely understood, which is something we're working on, right? And so, and then part of that, I think, is so important, that it's the setting the expectations right from the get-go. This is what I can do, this is what I can't do. And reminding you're reminding the other party, the human, like, as that experience unfolds, and as you go through the life cycle of that use case, reminding them, okay, this is what I've understood, this is where we're at, and just like checking in on them, letting them know like how far, like, we've how far are we from achieving, if it is a long winded, thing, and we have to get to, maybe there's multiple steps, and, we may need to just manage their expectations of like, this is, we're about halfway through, or we're almost there. We're like a couple of questions away from ending it, because we're all like multitasking and our attention spans has shrunk. And so we have to really be mindful of attention spans and how much cognitive load we bring to the table, and just always assuming that people have multiple things going on at the same time, or maybe not. Maybe they're crystal, like, focus on this conversation, and we do need to deliver things like, to that level of expectation right away, and in a nice way, and that just leave them off with the impression that, I want to come back to this. This is something I want to have as my normal go-to, because it's efficient, it's pleasant, and so on.
if I may build on you two, Nick and Olivera, I think, yeah, interesting points or very important ones that I'd just like to plus one, like what you just said, Olivera, in terms of, yeah, being mindful. I think that is so important. It's so easy to fall in love with one's own design, right? Yes, it's an amazing conversation and it's going to be cool. And you kind of tend to, or maybe not, because we all kind of test and stuff, right? But you could think, yeah, our users kind of just came here to have the conversation, right? And then just like reminding oneself, yeah, well, they actually came here because they had a reason, and also not forcing too much on the user. So Nick, when you said, yeah, sometimes people might just say human, because all they really need and want is now to speak to a human. And yes, of course, we want to keep users talking to the bot, and we want to kind of take the burden of the human agent and stuff. But at the end, it's still about like solving the user's issue, and some are maybe not in the space yet, or the issue is too big. They just really want to talk to a human agent, and not making it overly complicated, and doing everything we can to just keep them in the bot conversation, and just kind of, yeah, really being mindful about where is kind of the end of the bot conversation also.
Yeah, and I can keep building on that too, because I think another thing that's fundamental here is respect. So like
Yes.
when you're having a conversation, I think there's so many things to be respectful of. Like time is one thing. So if you're just rambling on about something that's irrelevant to your request, that's now no longer respectful of your time. You're having a bad experience. I think privacy is another thing. So like you don't ask extraneous questions if you don't need that information. Like I think we all have things that we wouldn't like to answer if we don't need to. So I think those are things that we need to consider as designers, as well as just like being empathetic. And like sometimes you're handling something sensitive and that needs to be respected. And I think sometimes that can be lost in terms of like the voice and tone of the bot. So yeah, I think those are just additional factors that we need to be mindful of when designing these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that you said that that I want to respond to, but I'll start with the sensitive content. So, when I've worked with LLM output that goes directly to the public, the question of sensitive content then comes up. Like, okay, so how do we handle sensitive content? So that's a perfect opportunity for a deterministic conversation design to come in, and when something sensitive like perhaps a question about racism or something that's culturally sensitive, I'll just say it again, comes up, then the brand is bound to hold back its LLM because LLM is not strictly controlled, right? Whereas a deterministic flow is exactly that. So that's when a RAG will back off, and the deterministic flow can then pop in, and then do its part. And then the second part was the second thing I wanted to respond to, rather, Nick, was you mentioned what amounts to in my head, empathy, but what amounts to in my head being a focus, like, so really highly focused and well-defined intents. So, what is this intent actually trying to do? What are its specific goals? And that brings us down to the basics, the happy path, the exception flows, the various scenarios that are hopefully well researched, and then of course the edge cases. And the edge cases where that's where the devil lives, and those details, and that's where it's 20%, but you're going to put 80% of the effort if you're not well defined. So and then that encompasses just a wide range of possibilities into a very focused step-by-step process that the user can then relate to, and hopefully done right, with the focus really being carefully scrutinized before a pen is put to paper. Then that really helps the user have their best possible experience under the circumstances, and maybe they'll start to like bots a little bit more.
So I kind of want to touch a little bit more on the voice and tone part. And I was curious, like, I guess if you have sensitive content and stuff, you can switch to deterministic. But with LLMs, how do you keep the voice and tone consistent with the brand while also meeting the customer? Or do you have any specific approaches or tips to doing that?
I can start here. I think one of the first and most fundamental things is to have a defined style guide. Like if you're, in an effort to find consistency, we have to make sure we're defining what that persona even is in the first place. So that has, what is my brand? Like, what kind of language do we use? Like, what is our energy? All of those questions need to be answered and defined before you can even start to tell the language model like how its output should be defined. So I think that's a great place to start, and it's one of those creative, fun problem-solving parts of the job that's really enjoyable. But it's also like primary to the user experience, so that when you come back, you know that you're speaking to the same entity, so to say, because the voice is consistent.
And a way to watch for that is random sampling eval. So pulling a sampling of outputs and giving it an eval, just marking it up. This works, this doesn't, and then feeding it back through your crack LLM team, who then continue to do the training. So that's more pragmatic sort of arm of what you just described, I think, Nick, of your concept. I agree completely. Yeah.
And I wanted to chime in as well to say that the nature of the beast with LLMs, it requires a ton of testing, even to arrive at a place where it is adequate, that being 70, 80%, because we're not reaching for 100. We're reaching, but we're not achieving necessarily 100 just because of the nature of LLMs. So that content creation has to be either like in-house, or it is handed over by a client that has hopefully followed the optimization guidelines for the content, and then pass it through again internally through the conversation designer or content designer, and make sure that the content meets all the best practice criteria. And from there, we have much better outputs when it comes to testing, because we want to make sure we have like things like consistency, accuracy of content, that it is according to the brand guidelines that you talked about as well, and that it is matches the personality of the brand. And then we can, talk about things like stylistically, how do the bot what does it say, what it doesn't say, and we can infuse it with, a casual tone, a professional tone, or depending on context, maybe it is maybe someone is in an emergency, and maybe it's an insurance bot. Here's an example. I worked on an insurance bot and IVR, and it was handed over from the client, and we have to optimize this IVR system and then convert it to voice AI. And buried in the options is, do you need emergency? So reworking that, my strategy and approach was to prioritize the emergency. That would be the first option. And that would be very like efficient wording, and so that they can easily make the choice and easily have a way to escalate to emergency. And then from there, everything trickles down from there in terms of priority. So I think it's understanding, optimizing the content and optimizing according to the priority.
And I think to add to that, one thing that I find important, especially nowadays, like with LLMs, and where there might be more teams or people spread across your company who might be working on this, for me, it's also important to advocate for the documents you create, right? Because Nick, you said it, right? And I 100% agree, bot persona, tone of voice documents and stuff, right? And I would say, I don't know, 6 years ago, you would kind of create this nice little document, and you would be the main person using it because you would do deterministic experiences, right? And now it's more, okay, this needs to be, the documents themselves need to be accessible, and also they need different formats, right? So that other people who might also be working on the experiences can just kind of copy paste them into their system prompt, or kind of use artifacts of it. So libraries of documents, or literally just making sure people know it's there and it's mandatory to use, and not just like a fun little design piece on the side, and really advocating for these, and choosing formats and folders that are accessible to everybody who needs to use those. I think that's for me, an important change. I would say that's very important nowadays.
Yeah,
I will +1. Oh, sorry, Nick, I didn't mean to step on you there. I just wanted a quick +1 on persona. Persona design. We're teaching about what it is, and who it is, and that is a foundational element in them learning how to interact. So, yep, big +1 on that, and I'll cede the floor. Please go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, no worries. I actually just wanted to follow up and ask you guys a question as far as, like, to your point, Romina, about standardizing this documentation so that other people can use them, especially for large language models. Like, what kind of formatting have you found that's effective for kind of instilling this personality inside of a language model? Like, is it, good and bad copy? Is it like rules as far as grammar and subject matter? I'm just kind of curious what other people are doing out there.
Such a good question. I'd actually say yes, I'm very curious about that as well. I would say, when I was saying format, for me, it's also like literally having like markdown instead of a PowerPoint presentation, for example, just to go like very contrary. But then, I would definitely say like from do's and don'ts, but also especially examples to put in. I guess that could become, I guess if you want to make those documents accessible to very many, are those examples then going to help? But yes, definitely do's and don'ts and examples I would throw in. I'm curious what the others say too.
No, the other thing I think about is like industry jargon, industry-specific jargon, company-specific jargon, technical terminology that is specific to that company. It could be insurance, it could be medical. We want to get that terminology right. And we want it to be, let's say, like I was working for a financial company that had 3 branches, 3 separate businesses under that, and one of them being insurance, the other one being financial company, and the third one being brokers, financial brokers. So that means that they had like an overarching persona that applies to all 3, but they also had individual. And I was responsible for creating that document that outlines the differences as well as the common elements across the board.
Nice. Yeah, I think from my experience, I agree with what you guys are saying. Like, I think do's and don'ts is great. Having that like brand specific business language, like we have this jargon, how can we translate it into a way the customer understands, and like really defining that, I think is super important. Yeah, and I've also had different results based on different models and things that we've used. Sometimes like having content examples, I find especially negative content examples has impaired the performance of like the language model delivering content that I think fits the brand voice, rather than almost doing like a single shot, like this is who you are, this is your persona, these are our technical terms, go. And then sometimes the content is just great. So something to experiment with, but I think there's a whole bunch of knobs and dials that we can switch to tune the output.
Yeah, great points. And thanks for sharing, everyone, like these tips. I feel like it's super practical and things that like a lot of us are trying to figure out along the way. So it's super helpful. And thanks also, Nick, for raising the question. I see there's a question from the audience that I wanna plug in that is like going a little bit more in like your experience also as someone who's like has their antennae on when they're experiencing chatbots and conversational AI experiences. What are the worst design failures that you have encountered, and what makes you personally very frustrated or angry?
Another question. Shall I just jump in first? Even though I'm like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of stuff I want to say, but also need to sort my thoughts quickly. But I think for me, it's actually yeah, what's the worst failures? I would really just say plain wrong answers. I think that's because it's like, yes, if the conversation isn't well designed, or I don't know, if you somehow kind of manage to get through as a user, of course you might not come back, you might be frustrated, you might still get to your goal, right? But if you literally are told something that's not true, or like outdated information, for me that would be the worst. And yeah, kind of that would also answer that second question from my perspective. If you can tell it's literally just not right what the bot tells you, or you ask for something important, or I don't know, just information, and turns out easily that it's old, or I don't know, redundant. Yeah, that would be my points here. So take care of your data and check it. Like, don't just plug something in and see what comes out. Like, check what you feed into the bot before you feed it in, and think about it too. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a primary response of just a bad experience. I mean, misinformation is just, if you're coming to a subject matter expert and then you get a lie back, like that is just a failure. I'm still trying to brainstorm some ideas too, but Marcie, you said one earlier that kind of sticks with me, and it's just like when we trap users in these cycles of whether it's like you're asking for a person, or maybe you're following up with information and you're just in this like no match loop. Like, those are just the worst experiences as a customer. And I feel like we have to keep in mind that, hey, there's always got to be a path out. Like, we can't have people be trapped in this conversation without any course for, repairing it.
Absolutely. There's nothing worse than an infinite loop. And we just don't want to do that to our users. We don't want to do that to a brand's customers. We don't want to do that to fellow human beings. Like absolutely, finding the logic, if it's deterministic, factoring it accordingly, and then of course ensuring that an LLM knows better than to loop, and they do. I think they're built that way, to keep a conversation moving in a given flow direction. But in deterministic flows, that's where that risk really lives, and it just takes some scrutiny and providing some options and ensuring that if you have one of these, like an arrow that loops back, make sure that it has options to get out. Absolutely, it's the least we can do. It's absolutely the least we can do.
There is another audience question. What are your thoughts on when a conversation should use an LLM versus when it shouldn't? I think this is a great question.
Well, I can come in from an industry point of view. So highly regulated industries, at least in the U.S., they incur some risk in using LLMs, and any business does, but the highly regulated ones are going to be more exposed to lawsuits and even to lawsuits. We'll just stop there. So that's where LLMs can still be used, but they need to be applied thoughtfully and very strategically with deterministic flows built in. So I mentioned the sensitive content example earlier. Anything to do with PII or PHI, anything to do with interacting with somebody in terms of their personal data, anything to do with representing the company in a way that could be interpreted poorly. That applies to all industries. That last point does. So, I'd say if there's risk, be very careful about the application of LLMs, and if all else fails, pull in a deterministic flow to augment, to mitigate risk. You'll never get 100% clarity and perfection with LLMs. We know that. Like, it's just a statistical probability of truth. That's all we're even going to get, even with the best RAG, even with the best training. However, we can work very, very hard. Even so, with that little bit of risk in the highly regulated zones, then it's important to watch for those use cases where where the risk could be higher of an LLM saying something off, or accessing the wrong information, and it could be higher for the company. So that's one example I'd give. Yeah, it's kind of broad, but yeah.
I think you perfectly summarized all these reasons, Marcie. I don't really have anything to add to that, but I do want to have I don't want to add another thought, which is adding an LLM is also not always the holy grail, and it's also not always what we should aim at, right? I feel like that's one thing, or at least I see it often, which is like everybody thinks you have to integrate an LLM, otherwise it's not state-of-the-art conversational design or conversational experiences. And it's going to be so much easier because of LLMs you can plug in now and stuff. And it feels like if you don't do it, you are like outdated or something. I at least sometimes feel like that when I read or see certain conversations. And I think that's just something that needs to change, because that's just not true. Often hybrid is a good way. Often, as you just so beautifully summarized, Marcie, is like there's so many reasons why you might not, and that is also totally fine, because it doesn't have to be. If it makes sense and if it's like kind of matches the setting, great. If not, it's also totally fine to go deterministic and just kind of choose for your case.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And just to piggyback a little more, maybe this is even a hot take, but I think you really have to explore what the purpose of the bot is, because for some cases, even something as simple as a decision tree might be what your customers need, where you can just click buttons and get the information you need to without the extra bells and whistles. I think we're in this era of Gen AI, large language models, where it's like a hammer and then everything just starts to look like nails, and we're like, oh, we can use it for this too and that, and it starts to become like we're over diagnosing it. And not to say that there's so much utility to get out of these models, so I really don't want to downplay it, but at the same time, I think you have to keep in mind what the actual purpose of this conversational experience is that you're building, and make sure that the technology that you're using can address that, and you don't have to over-engineer it.
Yeah, it's definitely adds a layer of complexity to our work when you integrate LLMs, and then it's like Marcie said, never going to be 100% accurate or get what you want. I actually was curious. To me, there's a difference between human to human conversation and human to machine communication with localization. When I'm talking to someone, I am not really localizing the way I speak. Like, I definitely adjust to how other people speak, but I don't change the way I fundamentally speak. But I feel like with chatbots, or with conversational AI experiences, it's a little bit different. And we put more of an emphasis on making sure we're using the same terminology. We're kind of meeting users more where they are. I was wondering how I guess how you approach localization, and especially with LLMs too, and how you kind of adjust the experience to fit where the customers are and meet the users where they need to be.
It looks like we lost Olivera. She's a great one for this.
Yeah,
for this point.
Yeah, I guess I can give my 2 cents here, which is almost a little contrary to what you're saying, Emily. And it goes back to what we were saying about the persona. I think that's one thing that is kind of an asset when you're building and designing a conversational experience, is that you're coming to this bot, or you're calling the system, whatever it is, and the voice and tone is going to remain the same. So let's say I call once and I just need to change my password, and I know how it addresses me. I kind of understand and pick up the personality of the system, so that the next time I come back and like, oh, now I need to, file a complaint, or like I need to get some kind of contact information, I already have some sense of familiarity with the system. So maybe it's not completely pushing back, but it does emphasize this point that we already discussed as far as being consistent, because I think that helps with this whole trust building, where it's like, okay, I've interacted with the system, it's worked for me before, I understand how it's going to come off, and I know how I need to respond. So I think that's just something we need to keep in mind, is just the consistency no matter what the locale is, so that when the customer comes into the system, they already have, you've developed this system, and yeah, people can already have that familiarity with it.
But I think it is a good point. Like, I guess I'm somewhere in between, because I do think, Emily, what you said is interesting. And I think, Nick, you kind of spoke to that point too, where, yes, it's about consistency. So you define kind of the personality of the bot and the way it speaks. And I do really like the point of going, well, Emily is not going to change her English when she speaks to different people from different English-speaking countries. So if you want to localize your bot to a way where it's going to mirror your accent, it's probably going to feel quite cheesy, right? So there's probably, the bot needs to kind of have its personality and stay within its speaking area, and then maybe not complete, because I think that's something also to fall in love with, right? Because technology would allow it. So let's pick up the accent of every user the bot's talking to. So, oh my God, that's going to be like horrible, because that's just going to be, it also might feel weird for the users the bot is talking to. So I think, consistency there's key, and also thinking about what is that language the bot is using, and maybe opting for something more general, because it might be too, as I said, like cheesy if the bot is all of a sudden having this, I don't know, southern accent. I don't know, design decision, of course, right? But I think it is an interesting point, and I think definitely something that might be tempting to overdo localization in terms of picking up an accent or something. Obviously, for language itself, like me being German, of course, I know, like in Germany, you have to speak German. Like it's just not that common to stay in English, right? But that's a different level of localization then. But we also have Olivera back for the question.
Repeat the question. I was curious, because I don't, like, when humans are talking, we don't really necessarily change the way we speak when we're speaking to people from other countries, or like we'll adjust kind of different aspects, but we won't like use the same terminology that, or same colloquialisms that they do. Like I don't say pop when I'm in the Midwest. I still say soda. So how do you deal with that or how do you approach that, I guess, with conversational AI experiences and just meeting users where they are, no matter where they're located?
Mm-hmm. No, I love that question. This is the very thing I was trying to solve for in my more recent project, and that is French Canadian versus French from France, or French from Africa, or French from South America, or wherever. They're all going to have their variety and colloquialism and differences, but there is like such a thing as table French, just like basic, everyday French that everyone, every francophone can understand. And then if you want to, localize, that is going to be, a huge undertaking if you're trying to cater, for example, for global French audience, right? Versus, let's say it's a Quebecois or French Canadian bank, then we can safely localize for French Canada, even though there are differences even with French Quebecois and French Canadian for the rest of Canada. There are some differences, but for the most part, we can stick to one strategy. Even beyond colloquialism, we're talking about differences in culture, like French Canadians are going to be quite different culturally than French from France. One is going to be more reserved. The other one is going to be much more direct. One's, sense of humor is completely different from the other. And so these are the kinds of factors that I could take into consideration. Also, the swear words are completely different. We're not going to use any of those in conversation design, but if we receive them, if we say something like sacré bleu in Quebecois, it might not be like that the client is swearing. It could be that it's just the way they speak. Maybe they cuss a lot. So we have to also interpret what they're saying. Even profanities have to be interpreted. I'll just pause there.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Just because, I feel like we do have this need for consistency, but at the same time, we also have to kind of know who our audience is too, and make sure we're not necessarily adjusting, but meeting them where they are. So I was just curious, how you were approaching that.
Well, so you mentioned table French. I haven't actually heard that term before, but I'm going to look it up now. I think about what we call SAE in the States, so Standard American English. So there are so many dialects around the U.S., right? And that, of course, is well known. But SAE is going to be the default setting for U.S. domestic bots, and it is going to be the expectation, in my view, that will also go out unless we have a localization team. Sometimes you just don't. However, like in the UK, it's pretty mutually understandable. And then SAE then becomes at least the internal to the US, the standard that, as a design lead, I would expect all of my conversation designers to really stick to, unless, we're really trying to make sure that the brand is speaking specifically to certain regions and want to make sure that they feel heard in that way. That hasn't come up yet. However, I would be very interested in going that way if we could. And then, of course, we also have Spanish bots or Spanish versions of bots, I should say, within the US. And it's a bit of a relief, honestly, having LLMs now, because when I was getting started, it was just deterministic. The logic was so, he's so close to the dialogue itself and how the dialogue functions that you really have to design completely all over for Spanish. You can't just translate phrase by phrase. Like Latin constructions are completely different. Or Latinate, I should say, constructions are completely different. So, in the event that, we do have a good use case for LLM and you need to be bilingual at least, then having, an English and a Spanish version is going to be very helpful. That does problematize complicate, doesn't problematize. It does complicate the inclusion of determinism, but that has its place too. And then of course you're gonna need a Spanish proficient conversation designer in that case as well. So yeah, those are kind of my strategy thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think I have one last question, as I see we're getting close to the end, that I wanted to kind of like pick back up a point that Romina made earlier on good data, because good answers are right answers, and good data is so important for like conversations we design and so on. Why is that the case? Do you think that it is so important to have good data? And how can we also make sure that the data we're inputting in those conversations are helpful and help us achieve these good conversations?
I rely heavily on my data scientists. Yeah, I expect them to have that anchoring, and then work collaboratively. Bring questions and hypotheses, and then get their expert inputs. As to how we may craft a conversation given what users are asking for and how they're asking for it. So that's one place that I would start. Yeah.
And I think I might just throw in my point from earlier again. I mean, if that part 100%, and then also I feel like maybe that's because I've recently looked a lot into, I come from custom builds, but I have been looking more into these, let's say, like template-based bot platforms, because I just find it extremely interesting. Like, okay, now there's all these providers who offer you to just build a bot quickly. We're like, oh, I wonder how that works, because there's so much need to do in the background. So I'm just kind of doing my little investigation here. And of course, they also have this like, yeah, just plug in your data. So plug in your PDFs, plug in, I don't know, your website URL, things like that, right? So, and I feel like that's a very interesting distinction, because whenever you talk about what many people might think of as like proper data, like a big fat spreadsheet with a lot of, let's say, product information, or like a proper data set, right? That is like, oh yeah, we need to really spend time on it. But if you use, let's say, less structured data, like, I don't know, Word documents, PDFs, PowerPoints, whatever stuff you could also hand to a bot, people feel like they don't need to spend the effort, or they like take the time to like look at it. And I think that's, an important handle, to still treat everything as data, and to actually also think about, is that the right format? Is my bot, is it structured enough? Does it need to be more structured? Things like that. So, because I feel like, yeah, if it's like really elaborate data, then it's more likely people spend more time to make sure it's really elaborate. But if it's like a PDF from, a company brochure, people for some reason feel like that's enough. It's like, that might not be. Or even worse, you put like 5 PDFs in and they actually contradict each other because you just haven't thought about it or haven't looked at all of them at the same time. So yeah, I've been like thinking about it and looking into that a lot. So yeah, but I'm going to stop here.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of that last point because it kind of aligns with some of my thoughts in terms of like what is valid data, or like sometimes you have contradictory data. So I think depending on how much you have, human oversight is always going to be, a gold standard, because someone could say, hey, our company has these 2 PDFs. This one's outdated. Let's not feed the outdated one into the model. But sometimes you just have so much information that you want to put into these systems that another potential solution is to have a large language model review the data and say, hey, like if anything is contradictory, if anything's outdated, flag that, and then let's review it before we just put this into the system. So I think that's another way to make sure that whatever you're putting in is like quality data and you're not just feeding a whole bunch of stuff into the system and just crossing your fingers and hoping that it won't lie and hallucinate, because it will.
Mm-hmm. I love that point both of you made, and I'm gonna add one more point, is identifying those data points where we could isolate like variables so that we can understand the user. And so when we play back a confirmation, we can say, oh, you talked about an account, is that right? And then so just having, being able to identify a word like account, and then if there are multiple types of accounts, then being able to do a thing like disambiguation, that will help the user identify what kind of account and so on. So understanding, having great data, but understanding what data and how we can identify, how we can implement a strategy in there to identify those variables, and so that we can understand the user better.
Thank you so much, everyone. I know we're coming up on time, so I just want to close with one last question. What advice do you have for people building these experiences, and to make sure that they're like conversational and connecting with users?
I'll go first. I just say spend the time needed to get your data well. Even if you're creating the data yourself, do a bit of research. It wouldn't take that much to find the best practices for content management, and do that groundwork. Don't try to cut corners, because that groundwork will save you weeks or months of time later down the road.
I'd say talk to users. Actually get human inputs. Talk to people in your life. What do they like? What do they not like when they interact with chatbots? And take that input. It is a form of data, and if you can do it through your company, even better.
One of those. Yeah, what can I add? Yeah, I'm 100% +1 on all of these. Like, don't underestimate would be my main message. But then also one thing I'd like to advocate for, which is more like in the towards all of us as designers. I think one thing we can also, or at least what I'm trying, is like, how can we advocate for the excitement in our job? Like, how can we make sure what we bring to the table is seen as valuable, interesting, exciting? Because I sometimes feel like I'd be very interested in what others think. I know we are at time, but if we keep like telling people, yeah, you need to watch this, you need to look into this, let's make sure we are not like uninvited from the table because people think, today with LLMs, everything is going to be easy. We just won't ask them because we can just ask an LLM. So let's make sure we kind of shed a positive light on what we do and constantly promote our great value. I think that's something also to work on. At least that's what I'm trying.
That's a great point. Thank you for making that point.
Yeah, I think these are all good points. I'll just throw in that I think we should also be having fun. I think one thing with a lot of bot experiences is that they kind of come off as robotic and bland. And obviously there's some, spectrum. You don't want to go overboard, but I think people anthropomorphize these systems, and we shouldn't be afraid to lean into that a little bit and to, allow the people to connect with these systems we design with it and have fun with the conversations we have. So that's some advice.
Love that. Thank you so much, everyone. This was an amazing conversation and I learned so much. And yeah, thank you all for being here. I guess stay tuned for announcements upcoming. And thank you all for an amazing season. And
Thank
we
you so
will
much.
keep in touch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a
guys.
great
Thank
summer.
you.
Enjoy your summer.
too.
All the best.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.